Hey, thanks for checking out my video. Today I'm going to paint from a reference photo that I took recently, just this week, while attending a soccer game. And we're going to use a unique palette, at least for me, painting on my sketchbook that is fixed with Gessoed paper, 11 by 14, about 60-pound paper, if you will. I'm going to use Vermillion, Crimson Red, Violet, Cerulean Blue, Ultramarine Blue, Titanium White, Sap Green, Yellow Ochre, Burnt Umber, Lamp Black, and Lemon Yellow. And I'll include those colors in the notes within YouTube here. And there's a reference photo in the bottom right-hand corner for you, just to kind of give you an idea of the general feel and look of the painting that I'm going to be going for. Definitely not trying to reproduce the image exactly, just more about the feel of the scene while I was there, standing at the tippy top of the bleachers, looking back over this open field. We'll get started by dropping in a little mixture of violet and lamp black. I'll sprinkle in a little bit of yellow and also some burnt umber as well. And we'll just get some of the larger shapes built in and also focus initially on developing the shapes that consist of the darkest shadows. Of late, we're kind of at the period in the year where we're dropping into the fall season, starting to get some of that cool weather. And this scene is actually taken in the northern Pocono mountain area, where we do have some higher elevations and some natural plains, which provide these open spaces where you can see kind of like a big sky effect. And the cloud formations hovering over the open field are what drew me to this scene, and feel fortunate I was able to snap this photo at this particular time. So you can see I'm gripping the brush at the very end, very loose, just trying to get big shapes and not get too caught up in trying to apply any detail at this point in time. And I'll just keep going back and forth, grabbing pigment, making adjustments, and trying to use my intuition to guide me. Now I'm going to dip into my sap green. I'm going to grab a different brush, and I'm going to lay in some of the bigger shapes on the flat earth plane there, where that field lies. And I'll start with almost pure sap green. I'll put in a little bit of yellow ochre from time to time and try to model the shapes of the ground in a way that kind of honor some of those divisions within the field. But at the same time, I'll make shifts with the intention of just making the painting a little bit more interesting. So in recent months, particularly throughout the summer, I've been doing a lot of plein air painting, almost purely focused on getting out in the field and painting directly from observation of the different scenes that I've been painting. This is the first studio-based painting I've done in a while, and it's an example of the circumstances that we're in. It's an example of how a little bit of preparation can go a long way to ensure that you have the opportunity to practice in anticipation of cooler weather and a busier schedule, with at this time our 16-year-old twins involved in high school and high school sports and other activities. There are times when it just gets so busy, and with work and everything else, we're so hurried that there's not an opportunity to travel out to the field for those plein air opportunities. So I created this gesso pad, which is basically just acrylic gesso on paper that's dried. It gives me the opportunity to very quickly create these paintings in studio, and it solves two problems. One is I have a nice surface which is ready for use, which is inexpensive, and in addition to that, once the painting dries, storage is nice and easy. It doesn't take up a lot of space. So I'll continue working here, and we'll finish up getting some of the basic shapes in for the ground, and not giving too much care to where the painting begins and ends toward the edge of the paper. Actually kind of going over the gessoed parts there, so we'll see over time some of the oil seep into the paper, but that's okay. This painting is nothing that I would intend to try and hang on a wall or sell, at least in most instances. This is really just for practice, and who knows, maybe over time I'll decide that it makes sense to try and build this painting into a larger work on a more durable surface, frame it and present it to the world that way. But for now, this is just for practice. So I'm going through and took some of that lamp black into my violet, and also some of the ultramarine blue, a little touch of that, and just darkening some of those darker shadow areas off into the distance at the base of the trees, where the trees meet the field. Going to add some additional yellow ochre here in the foreground. Try to take advantage of atmospheric perspective. Yellow will help create the illusion of the ground actually being closer. And I'm going to do another color shift here on this part of the field in the bottom right-hand corner. So there are on my channel 6 book briefs that I've done at this point. Actually 5, but I'm working on a 6th. And eventually a 7th, which will be based upon the classic book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. So working my way through that book for the second time and kind of synthesizing my notes and getting ready to do a book brief on that. And there are some really notable quotes from within that book, which are really, really important for anybody who's interested in learning to draw or paint. Drawing is, one of the several skill stacks that are involved in learning to paint. And, it's interesting. I'll share some thoughts from time to time from that book. But for now, what I'm going to do is actually mix up some grays and start building up some of the basic shapes in the clouds. And generally speaking, with this painting, I am going to go a little heavier with the pigment, and also generally am going to choose darker, more saturated colors than you might see in the reference photo, especially in the ground and in the trees and so forth, but also amongst some of the clouds. I'm doing this intentionally because the photo that I took was a little bit washed out, and it also was impacted by the fact that this was an evening soccer game that I was attending, so some of the lights within the stadium were actually reflecting off of the trees and the ground, which kind of altered the scene a little bit. So I'm going to try and accommodate adjust for that. But you'll see a mix of cool grays and some warm grays. I'll just lay those in some shapes that I think are interesting, and try to do so in a way that builds some feeling of perspective within that sky plane. It's always helpful when painting a sky, especially one over open space like this where you can see well off into the distance, to think of the sky as a plane or a reflection of the earth, and as far as how it's shaped anyway. So you have to deal with perspective. Those clouds that are closer to you, that yet when painting on a surface like this, a flat surface like this, are actually going to be toward the top of the image. Those are the clouds that are closer to you. And generally speaking, they will be rounder, more multi-dimensional. Those off into the distance, or at least on the surface that you're painting on, those that are closer to the ground, usually the middle or the bottom of the painting, those images will appear smaller because they're reflecting the reality of the fact that they're further off into the distance. So we'll just gradually build up the sky, and we'll work to leave some open spaces where you can see the white surface, so we can drop in suggestions of those openings in the sky where here at sunset you see a nice yellow tint reflected off of the higher atmosphere. Now we're mixing up an even cooler, lighter gray, which we are going to drop in beneath those larger cloud shapes toward the top of the image here. And we're going to use that to fill in most of the bottom portion of the sky area. It'll actually meet the treetops, and you can see me mixing that up there, just adding a little bit of white and a little bit of vermilion. So I'm kind of going back and forth, and as far as the warmth and coolness. So this is actually a little bit warmer. I mistakenly said it was cooler. It's actually a little bit warmer than the rest of the sky area. So I'll fill this in, and I'll try and leave some space, and use the brush to create different striations and marks within this larger shape. And as we work our way through, just try to be mindful of the fact that we do want to leave some open spaces. At the same time, not get too precious with these marks, because the plan here is to also use the paper towel to erase some of the marks as well, to create some more carefree, subtle shapes within these larger shapes. So I'm having a little problem with my tripod here, so that's why you see the camera moving around from time to time and drifting in closer to the painting. It's not intentional. The arm of my tripod here is just it's not quite strong enough to hold the weight of my phone, which I'm filming this video on, so you'll see me adjust that from time to time. So at this point, most of the major shapes are in, and actually I'd be quite happy actually stopping and just leaving this painting as is right now. However, I'll continue to play and look to bring in elements of the scene that drew me to it originally. And we'll actually start wiping away, just playing at this point with the paper towel, trying to take off some of the excess paint. Most of the paint that I'm using is at least semi-transparent, so when it's really thin, you'll see evidence of the surface color showing through, and I'll use that to my advantage here, to try and build some more softer, more subtle shapes, shades, and colors within the larger shapes here in the painting. And at this point, I'm kind of just playing. Definitely shifting at this point away from, using my conscious mind. I'm kind of in subconscious mode now. Not really thinking not really thinking in terms of process. Just kind of having fun at this point, playing, trying to develop an image that appeals to me. And along those lines, I'm actually going to share a couple of quotes as I make my way through this stage of the painting from drawing on the right side of the brain. One is a quote, a reference from another book that the author Betty Edwards shares about midway through the book. And this is from The Art Spirit by American artist and teacher Robert Henry B. Lippincott. The object of painting a picture is not to make a picture. However, unreasonable that may sound, the object, which is back of every true work of art, is the attainment of a state of being, a state of high functioning, a more than ordinary moment of existence. The picture is a byproduct of the state, a trace, the footprint of the state. So I thought that was interesting. Definitely, oftentimes we'll feel that while painting, almost like when you take a long drive on a highway, you kind of just lose track of time and find yourself in a place you don't really understand how you got to. So once you get comfortable with some of the basics, color mixing, drawing, the different tools, your paintbrush, your palette, the surface you're painting on, and so forth, it definitely is kind of a venture into subconsciousness. It takes a while to get there, but it's part of the reasons why I'm so drawn to paint. Now, I have some nice, more subtle edges and shapes amongst the clouds, and once again, I would feel comfortable almost leaving this painting right here. But I want to build in more of the elements that drew me to the painting. So I'm actually taking my yellow pigment, which is kind of a brilliant warm color, and as the sun was setting over the horizon, you definitely saw a strong wash of yellow light reflected amongst some of the clouds. And this is Winsor Newton lemon yellow. I have a small tube of it. Some remnant paint I sifted through and decided to use that because I figured it would be the most brilliant. And it's working out pretty good. Once again, I'll work my way through with paper towel. I'll try to be careful not to mix the yellow pigment with some of the cooler grays, because that'll tend to turn a little bit green because of the blue within the gray. I'll try to make sure the softer edges that mix in are at least tending to mix in with the warmer areas toward the bottom of the sky where there's a little bit more red and orange. Interesting fact about vermilion, I don't recall using that often in my paintings. I may have to make the conscious effort to try and do so going forward. Vermilion is a brilliant reddish orange pigment that's made from mercury sulfide cinnabar. Apparently it was used a lot more frequently amongst a lot of the painters that I tend to be drawn to, American and European painters from the late 1800s and early 1900s. I just rediscovered the pigment. This particular paint was kind of in a drawer. That includes a whole bunch of paints that I haven't used in a long time. So I decided to go in and build up some of the darks. And in the sky, I want to make that a little bit more dramatic. I also want to make it so that it resonates a little bit better with the lighter areas and creates that stronger contrast and helps that yellow pop. And also, will help reflect the darker shadows, which I'll reinforce in the land portion of the painting as well. At this point, I'm really not consciously thinking about much of anything. I'm just looking to, create a feeling within this painting, and particularly within the sky, that resonates a little bit more than what I had there already. And while I'm doing this, I'm gonna pull another quote from Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, anywhere I reference the term drawing, you could almost insert the word painting. Once again, from the middle of the book, and these are the words of the actual author, Betty Edwards, who actually created this Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, which is a great tool to learn how to draw and therefore paint. As you can see now, I'm building up more contrast and developing some of the darker areas. I'll try to vary the color temperature a little bit, and for those areas that are off in the distance, cool them off. So here's the quote: "Realistic drawing of a perceived image requires the visual mode of the brain, most often mainly located in the right hemisphere. This visual mode of thinking is fundamentally different from the brain's verbal system, the one we largely rely on nearly all of our waking hours. For most of our tasks, the two modes are combined. Drawing a perceived object or person may be one of the few tasks that requires mainly one mode, the visual mode, largely unassisted by the verbal mode. There are other examples. Athletes and dancers, for instance, seem to perform best by quieting the verbal system during performances. Moreover, a person who needs to shift in the other direction from visual to verbal mode can also experience a conflict. A surgeon once told me that while operating on a patient, mainly a visual task, once a surgeon has acquired the knowledge and experience needed, he would find himself unable to name the instruments he needed. He would hear himself saying to an attendant, 'Give me the thingamajig.' Learning to draw, therefore, turns out not to be learning to draw. Paradoxically, learning to draw means learning to access at will that system in the brain that is the appropriate one for drawing. Putting it another way, accessing the visual mode of the brain, the appropriate mode for drawing, causes you to see in the special way an artist sees. The artist's way of seeing is different from ordinary seeing and requires an ability to make mental shifts at a conscious level. Put another way, and perhaps more accurately, the artist is able to set up conditions that cause a cognitive shift to happen. That is what a person trained in drawing does, and that is what you are about to learn." So that, in essence, that little quote there, it's about 2 paragraphs long, maybe 3, and that really addresses the essence of the book that I've mentioned a couple times here, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. So I'll be excited to bring that book summary to you, which will be available on YouTube in a short video of less than 10 minutes, and then also on my Patreon page, where I'll put a PDF of my full book summary along with my other summaries. So now I'm continuing to work through and build darker shadows throughout the land area using various shades of violet and blue. And I've used those same colors to build up the base of that evergreen tree in the foreground. Actually, that evergreen tree is an interesting element. It's actually one of the things that drew me to this image. I thought it does a nice job of pointing the viewer up toward the sky and also back into that background area. And it was there, as you saw within the original reference photo. I made it a little bit larger and pulled it forward a little bit. In my mind, it helped enhance the composition a little bit. And, there are some, key concepts associated with compositional design, but it's largely subjective. So you may or may not agree. But I just felt it did a nice job of pulling the painting together by pulling that shape forward and enlarging it just a little bit. So we're approaching the point in this painting where the image is quite well developed, and I'm just going to work my way around the painting in shorter bursts from the background to the foreground, from the sky to the lightest parts to the darkest parts, and work the edges selectively and make minor adjustments throughout the whole entire painting. So I'll just work my way around almost in a circular fashion, and I'll take longer breaks in between brush strokes, observing, trying to decide what might elevate the painting a little bit more and bring it closer to the reality that drew me to the scene initially. And here you can see I've moved to a smaller brush, resisted that urge and to do so much earlier. And I have some darker violet, and I'm working in some of that vermilion, and also some of my crimson red as well, just trying to hint toward maybe some of the sunlight reflecting off of the bottoms of those clouds. And we'll soften that, but we'll sprinkle that throughout the whole scene as well, because the light does tend to bounce around and you just never know where it's going to pick up little hints of some of those less familiar colors within the clouds. We're going to speed up the video a little bit now for a couple reasons. One, we don't want this to be too long of a video for you. And also I think it does a really nice job of illustrating and showing how we're working our way throughout the painting and making adjustments using all of our tools, our paper towels, our brushes. And right now, what we're doing is playing with the paper towel, adjusting some of the edges within the shapes within the ground, and wiping away some paint, trying to create the illusion of light filtering in through the fields and hitting some of the areas where some of the separate fields are maybe joined together by stone rows and grass cut in different directions and so forth. And now we'll rebuild some of the shadow areas. And now we'll go up into the sky with a different brush and build in some of the darker areas. And we'll continue to work in the sky for a bit, just looking to create some shapes. Now bringing in almost pure titanium white, oftentimes mixed in with some of my grays to varying degrees, and then bringing some of that down into the distant areas as well in an attempt to cool it off and push those tree lines back. So I'm just taking some time to observe what next steps might be needed for this painting, and deciding to actually build in some of those smaller cloud shapes that are off into the distance closer to the horizon. I'll try to vary the color temperature, the size, and the shapes. In lots of cases, just a matter of a very light, slight touch, barely touching the surface of the painting, to get these smaller shapes in, just dropping them in as random as possible. So I don't want to forget to say thank you. Thanks for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found it useful, if you found it entertaining, please give it a like, subscribe, and consider sharing it with a friend who might find it useful or entertaining as well. You can see him dropping in some of those colors used in the sky to vary the color temperature within some of the dark shadowy areas within that tree in the foreground, and also within the other shapes that make up the ground plane. Also, check out some of my works. I've been keeping my website up to date at www.thomasmichaelnieman.com. You'll find some blog entries, some of my writings, nearly all of my paintings shown there, and some other useful content as well. So once again, thanks for checking out my video. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay well. Take great care. Hope to see you again next time.